Welcome back everyone to another episode of Aster-yee-ah. Hope you guys enjoyed that tribute that I released earlier, which was supposed to be on Carl Sagan's birthday of November 9th, if he was still here. He's one of the main sources of inspiration for this series, including the involvement with the pulsar map, which, as you remember from episode 1, is the core road layout for this city. In the tribute video, I showed you a few new areas that I did not go over yet, but I will do so in this video. In this episode, we're going to finally begin on the highway, but just a small stretch of it. This highway will be a beltway, which will go around the whole city, and in this work area, I'm going to be working on an arcology, where the highway will run through and connecting with the arcology, and then running upwards to connect with the three neighborhoods of Zarya, Zvezda, and Unity, including an inner city route to connect with Yugen. Speaking of these three neighborhoods, a little reminder is that I named these neighborhoods after the first three modules of the International Space Station, which is one of the largest collaborative efforts mankind has ever done, and the single most expensive man-made object to date. With that on mind, November 2nd marked the 15th anniversary of the International Space Station with its first expedition in the year 2000, and since then, it has been 15 years of continuous human presence in space. Since this area has seen much development in the last 3 episodes, we're going to move away for a bit, because before we further development of these 3 neighborhoods, we need to start building a highway system. I'll move downward to link up with the regional highway and bring that beltway upward to the 3 neighborhoods. But along the way, I want to choose this area as the home of this new arcology, because we have a large plot of land that is unusable. It would be counterintuitive to reclaim all this land in an ecologically aware city just to build some buildings on top of it. But rather, let's keep the lake the way it is and have it become not only a home to the animals, but for a very tall structure that will provide a home to 60,000 people theoretically. This will become something like a wetland park, harboring the wetland itself that is used to filter out pollutants of the city, kind of like another one of those hydrological water processing plants that I had built in episode 3. And this wetland is for citizens to enjoy the habitat via boardwalks and pedestrian paths. To feed the wetland, I'm going to create a natural, small, meandering river from the central island rivers and connect it to this lake. From the lake, I'm going to add a few more other rivers so it can connect to the ocean. Density is one of the key principles that I am going after, as I explained several times in the past, because density allows the area of impact to be condensed down to a point. Sure, this area will be an area of high influence, but it's far better than having a sprawling urban development that becomes harmful to the environment and also spreads the population outward, which becomes the opposite of building community value. So with that reminder, I'm going to build the first inner city stretch to demonstrate this density principle even further, with the highway and the train station at the end of this avenue, which is the end of one of the pulsar map appendages. I'm going to have the train station here, which will have the pedestrian paths linking with the arcology and the surrounding neighborhoods, including the wetland, and the inner city highway will run over this avenue and the train station, linking with the beltway that runs from the arcology and upwards to the 3 neighborhoods, and including Yugen. This lake will be attached to the Waldeinsamkeit highway that I mentioned in the last episode, and that will run through the entire island, touching natural wonders similarly like the beltway. Speaking of the Waldeinsamkeit animal highway, I noticed from the last episode that the word Waldeinsamkeit became a very provocative word for discussion. Apparently, it is a very old word that not even a lot of my German subscribers knew about and probably don't even use anymore. This word, again, literally translates to English as forced solitude, but this straightforward definition evades the affirmative connotation that it has and refers to the feeling of connectedness with nature. A few of my subscribers, including my own research, have told me that this word had its origins back to the Romanticism era, a lot more recent than what I had originally assumed, and honestly I should have done more research than just the definition of the word. The Romanticism period took place from the beginning of the 1800s to the mid-1850s, and was an artistic and an intellectual movement that was partly a reaction to the Industrial Revolution. It was a movement that aimed at the deepening appreciation for nature and the emphasis on imagination and emotion. The word Waldeinsamkeit was first coined by German poet Ludwig Tieck. He was a poet that wrote with a nature sense, things like his experience of when walking through the Alps, or midnight moonlight and such. This became an important word for German Romanticism, and was frequently used during that period, including by monks and other poets like the famed American poet Ralph Waldo Emerson. Ludwig Tieck had the word implied as an escape from reality and into a dream world, a yearning for remoteness, which the forest is seen as an important setting for this terminology, obviously, because forests are dark and isolated, where spirits may come and communicate with nature. So now you can see that this word is a rather mystical and metaphysical word. I also had one German subscriber argue that Wald-Einsamkeit was not about the loneliness in the forest, but rather unity. He described Einsamkeit, which is loneliness, as unity, and this got me very confused because a lot of modern sources, and including my German friends, had told me that Einsamkeit meant loneliness, which you can break down the word as ein, meaning one, sam as the English suffix as some, like lonesome, and kite as the English suffix ness, and combined equaled loneliness. This is very similar to the Dutch word eenzaamheid, as a Dutch friend that I had made from study abroad had told me. So I was curious and dug a little bit deeper into why he thought it was unity rather than loneliness. What I had found from the book Politics of the One by Artemi Magen, which recalls an essay from Martin Heidegger, a German philosopher, stated that in the classical metaphysical definition, Einsamkeit originally meant unity rather than the straightforward modern definition of solitude. Heidegger explained that this condition or state brings about the unity in oneself, the internal unitary unit, in an existential sense. There's a similar term, Zweisamkeit, which you can literally translate as solitude of the two, but it has become a romantic cliché. For example, two lovers become united as one and isolated in their love, basically like the word togetherness in English. But in Western metaphysics, this concept of oneness is about the grasp on the internal unity, and this concept goes way back to ancient Greek times. Upon all these fightings, I'm like, whoa, this is some seriously deep stuff, which I enjoy because I love languages, and it's kind of like archaeology, just digging up the bones and learning about it. But anyways, this isn't a language decoder series, so I'll get back to the city building. Here I have the main framework of the road and rail infrastructure of this future inner city neighborhood. Below is the avenue that runs from the city center, as reflected in the pulsar map as said in episode 1. Above that is the railroad tracks that extends again from the center and stopping at a station at the end of this avenue. The track here does not end unlike the avenue, but will continue on. Above the rails I placed a bike path as a highway for cyclists. I placed this closer to the ground rather than the pedestrian path because, well, it gets harder to get your bike onto higher ground if you've ever tried. We could say that we have elevators for bikes, which would be a really cool thing to see in the game for both pedestrians and cyclists, but we simply do not have those, but we can still pretend. But, thinking from a ramp perspective, having the bike path closer to the ground makes it easier for civilians to access the cyclist highway. And the final top piece is the highway extending from the Beltway that will run through the city center. I want this future inner city neighborhood to be as tall as it can be, and as dense as it can be, while keeping in mind of the ecology around the rivers. Along the highway, I want to create a skyscraper canyon appearance, so we can achieve this layered look of infrastructure. It creates that image of futurism, but at the same time, this is quite in opposition to everything else that's about community and the environment. In this city center, things are going to get very dense, and if you were a citizen walking through the streets, you may feel this sense of no headroom, like the towers are just always above your head and taking that sky away from you, which they kind of are. Even though we are not plants, humans still need sunlight as well, and I want to create this exposure. It's important to not fill every hole with concrete and steel, so I'm going to try and find ways in the future to slip in some greenery to allow some open space to feel more freer and less confined to a tight spot. But these buildings are not just strictly rooms, but also holds recreational centers on the top like biodomes, community centers, vertical farms, and etc. for people to enjoy life indoors as if they were outside. On the sides of the neighborhood, there will be obviously some nice eco-passageways for civilians to enjoy nature. I am planning to place more of those sound damper zones as seen with the Wald-Einsamkeit Animal Highway. So here's the beginning work of the inner city neighborhood, and I'm going to work on the development of this in the future. A lot of the buildings have already resetted themselves, but I will put them back the way I wanted once we get to this neighborhood. But the concept is to have this wrap around elegantly of the meandering river and the lake. Again, taking from episode 5, I took the natural workings of a river by creating riffles and pools. In the back, I've developed the mountains, making it a bit more realistic and also to feed the lake with its water streaming from the peak. I'm going to continue on making this as realistic as possible, pushing the river into the lake and creating a river delta, and making some wet meadows, bogs, and marshes on the side. So far you can see that I've made a fine definition of the hydrological floodplain and the topographic floodplain. Like I said earlier, I'm going to build this Arcology, which is an asset by the awesome modder Drossel Villa. I'm currently collaborating with him so we can make an even larger arcology that would be more suitable for Aster-yee-ah. I designed this arcology and just messaged Dorosaville about it, asking if he could help me out. And here's a picture of the work in progress so far. But I'll get into more depth with that once we've reached that episode. This particular building that I am using now is the Millennium Tower, an arcology standing at 170 floors tall and was set to be built in Odaiba of Tokyo Bay to counter the growing overpopulation problem of Tokyo. It was first proposed in 1989 by the Obayashi Corporation and was designed by architect Sir Norman Foster, though I am not sure why it never went through with the construction, as I couldn't find any information on it. I'm assuming they're just waiting for the right time and resources to build this thing because honestly we don't have the right materials to build such a megastructure. But it could also be economics. When this was first introduced in 1989, Japan was going through a deflation of its bubble economy that had been growing for several decades. The 1990s for Japan is considered the Ushinawareta Junen, or lost decade. So basically the whole Odaiba area of Tokyo Bay became a ghost town. But luckily there are still plans in place for this building to be built, as the plans don't seem to be discarded, but just pending. The same architect of this arcology designed the recent arcology called Crystal Island, and it almost started construction in Moscow of 2009, but was postponed by the global economic crisis. But with all this talk about arcologies, what is an arcology? An arcology is a megastructure that takes the principles of architectural design and integrate it with ecology, creating a highly dense three-dimensional concentration, as opposed to the two-dimensional urban sprawl, which wastes land, consumes too much resources and time, and isolates people. You may see many examples of arcologies in science fiction, from like SimCity with its launch arcology to regional arcology, or the planet Coruscant from Star Wars, a planet-wide city full of thousands and thousands of interconnected arcologies. You can probably take this idea even further and say ring worlds are arcologies, like in Halo, or even a Dyson sphere of a star system, a highly advanced megastructure used to capture the energy of a star, and can be a living habitat for species. Today we don't have any arcologies, mainly because they're just too expensive and many of the designs proposed are too massive and would require very strong material, say like carbon nanotubes, to support the structure. But we do have arcology like cities that try to take on that principle, such as Masdar City in Dubai, which is an experimental city that tries to make an insanely dense living habitat that is eco-friendly and self-sustainable. Okay, so this is the Yggdrasil ecology, and I have developed it here in the middle of this lake to compensate for the loss of land. And you may think that how will a massive structure like this stand in the middle of the lake without sinking? Well, I'm not an expert in geotechnical engineering, but what I can take from engineering techniques and biology is the inspiration from Chicago and mangrove trees. If you didn't know, Chicago was originally a swamp, where even the first few houses of the settlement sank into the ground. Chicago was named after the French interpretation of the Native American word belonging to the Algonquin languages of the region, Chicaquah, meaning walled garlic, a plant that grew in the area. The soil was very spongy, and over the years when Chicago became a large city, engineers tried to think of ways to build taller buildings on this mushy soil. The engineers of Chicago tried several experiments, and one was that they made grillage foundations of steel beams laid down on a concrete flooring above the mushy soil, acting like a snowshoe. But this will most likely not work for such a large structure as this arcology, as it can topple over. It's too massive to float. Another method geotechnical engineers experimented were caissons, or concrete pillars that went down to the bedrock or hardpan, and provided a dry environment for construction workers to build. This has been around for centuries for building like wells and things like that, but this was commonly used in the 1800s for large projects like bridges and dams. But according to the book History of the Development of Building Construction in Chicago by Alfred and Frank Randall, says that the first use of the caisson as a foundation for a building was the 11-story Methodist Book Concern building on Washington Street of Chicago. After this, it became standard for buildings to adopt this technique, even till today with our towering skyscrapers. And tying back to Chicago, the Chicago Spire uses this technique, but sadly never finished construction because of money. For me, I would say I have a great disdain for money, because it always gets in the way of progress. But again, that's just me speaking for myself. Another form of inspiration I take is from how trees stay on top of swampy soil, and one of the most famous trees for this is the mangrove. Mangroves have a large net of roots. It works by spreading the roots out far and wide beneath the tree to keep the tree stable, The four skytree buildings around the ecology are connected by the base to keep the structures stable. Let's talk about the name now, Yggdrasil, or the Tree of Life. Yggdrasil comes from Norse mythology that connected the 9 worlds of that mythology. The 9 worlds, which you could say are like dimensions or universes, where different species live, such as Asgard, home of the gods, or Midgard, home of the humans. This is an interesting concept of viewing the universe as vertical, not round or flat, having the roots going down to the world of fog and mist, of where a dragon lives, to the branches in the heavens where an eagle lived. Though, stepping away from the mythology a bit, this kind of sounded like something in ecology, resource partitioning, which in this case points to the most famous example, the warbler birds. But first, resource partitioning is when similar species are after the same limited resources, coexisting in the same ecological community. But they do not go so far to the extent of competition like pushing each other out into extinction, but rather evolving in different niches to avoid such competition. Examples like feeding times are different from others, or using the same resource but in a different location, or having a special adaptation to retrieve the resource in a different behavior. They minimize competition but maximize success. Going back to the warbler birds example, similar species of warbler birds live in spruce trees, all using the tree as a home but in different parts of the tree, others near the ground, others near the top, some inside, some outside, and etc. And they all eat the same insects on the tree, but in different ways and different regions of the tree to avoid competition. In the case of the Yggdrasil tree of Norse mythology, all the species, which are mostly humanoid, live on the Tree of Life, using the tree as their habitat and for the water. Though they do compete for other things, so it's not a 100% direct perfect example. It just reminded me of that a little bit with the ecological term, as they live in the same tree. But we can apply this to the wetland and the ecology of Aster-yee-ah, that all the citizens, including the animals, use the structure and the land as a home and resource of utility, from economics, a term for usefulness and happiness. And animals also dwell here because of its lushness and food, and having humans coexist with all of this, thus neither are competing. There's a whole in-depth story to the Norse mythology that I won't go into, because the main reason I chose Yggdrasil as the name of this arcology goes beyond the word play of Tree of Life. But because the original tree connected the 9 worlds, this tree will be surrounded by 9 neighborhoods, along with this wetland. And also that the highway running through the ecology would be called the Wyrd Beltway. Wyrd is an Old English word that means fate, and is from the Old Norse word Urd. Urd was one of the names of the 3 Norns, the goddesses of fate that live near the well of Urd, by the Yggdrasil tree. They start their day by pouring water on the Yggdrasil tree from the well of Urd to keep it alive and green. They then spend most of their day weaving the fabrics of faith, determining the course of every person's lives. The Wyrd Beltway will connect all parts of the city, like the fabric of the Norns, and the wetland will act as the well of Urd, keeping everything in the region healthy, ecologically. And I will also name the lake Urd. The concept of fate as a fabric also sounds like the modern theory of theoretical physics, superstring theory. Simply, superstring theory states that the very fundamental basics that makes up everything in the universe are made up of small vibrating strings that transcends all 10 dimensions of the universe. It was found that these strings vibrate in such a specific number of frequency that everything in the universe works the way it is. If the number was just changed a little bit, perhaps gravity wouldn't form in the way as we know it, or the nuclear forces, or magnetism. These strings determine everything in our universe of how things are made and work and such. Wyrd is an Anglo-Saxon concept of fate that is similar to our modern-day perception of fate, and the modern English version of Wyrd is weird. From the epic of Beowulf, Grendel, the antagonist, when fighting Beowulf said, "Fate must go as it must," stating that he is not all that foolhardy, because he is aware that Beowulf may defeat Grendel as what fate may choose. However, this concept of fate is not all that dark. If a warrior has enough courage to fight, fate may swing in his favor and change the outcome, which is the mindset of Viking warriors. As the great hero Beowulf said, "Fate often saves an undoomed man if his courage is good." I guess you could say, despite how harmful us humans can be to the environment, there is no harm in trying to better ourselves, because fate may just swing in our favor if we had the courage to take on the challenge. Okay, so let's look at what we've created. Firstly, let's talk about the ecology of this area. Over to the right, I've created a river delta, and over to the left is an alluvial fan. You may say, well, what's the difference? They look the same. Well, alluvial fans and deltas are both sedimentary landforms deposited by flowing water. So, alluvial fan deposits contain sediments of varying sizes, depending on the speed of the flowing water. The faster the water flows, the larger the sediment that the stream can carry. When energy decreases in the flow, the sediments slow down and settles out. This happens as the flow reaches a broad and flat surface, or a standing body of water. Alluvial fans are often found at the base of mountain ranges where intermittent streams flow. Intermittent streams flow when it rains or when the snow melts. Sediment drops out of the stream flow as energy decreases to widening the channel. Over time, sediment builds up in the channels at the base of the mountains and forces the stream to carve another channel. When channels fill in, the process starts again, streams filling in and moving to the side to form a fan-shaped deposit. Deltas are similar to alluvial fans in shape, but are deposited in a different environment. Sediments that form deltas are transported by continuous flowing water and typically smaller in size. Delta deposits are found at the mouth of streams or rivers as they empty into lakes and oceans. As water flows into standing bodies of water, it loses energy and can no longer carry the sediment as it once did. The sediment settles out to the bottom and forms an underwater fan. For the mountain, I originally had flowing water coming from the peak, but I later removed it because I couldn't get the right flow right. It was either too big or too small that even the water wouldn't flow correctly. I settled on a dry alluvial fan and will pretend that if it rains or when the snow melts, the water will return. On the sides of Lake Wyrd, I have swamps and marshes. Again, what's the difference? A swamp is a wetland ecosystem characterized by mineral soils with poor drainage, and by plant life dominated by trees. Swamps are found throughout the world, most often in low-lying regions with poor drainage, and next to rivers which supply the swamp with water. Some swamps develop from marshes that slowly fill in, allowing trees and woody shrubs to grow. As for marshes, well, marshes are characterized by poorly drained mineral soils and by plant life dominated by grasses. Marshes are most common at the mouths of rivers, especially where extensive deltas have been built. The marsh plants slow down the flow of the water and allow for the nutrient-enriched sediments to be deposited, thus providing conditions for further development of the marsh. To enjoy these natural wonders, the Arcology with the 4 Skytree buildings made by Drosovilla will give access to the area via boardwalks, and I've added things like fishing piers to add a variety of activity for citizens to enjoy. I also want to say thank you to Drosovilla for your awesome work. The Skytree building is actually his asset that won him the summer modding contest, hosted by Colossal Order. I also want to say thank you for working with me on the ecology for Aster-yee-ah. I really hope to see it soon, but at the same time, please take your time. The holidays are coming up, so please enjoy them. It's the most wonderful time of the year. These are really great assets, and thank you for updating the Millennium Tower just in time for the creation of this episode. I highly recommend you guys to check out his work if you haven't known about it already. Please support him if you can. Let's talk about the interchange now. This actually took me a very long time to figure out, and it's still not done yet. Well, I went through several different drafts and just ended up with this tightly made turbine looking interchange. It's still a work in progress, which I still have to add in the underground connections and linking up with the railroad tracks underneath. The objective is to, again, not waste so much land for infrastructure like this, and this is probably going to be one of the only interchanges in this city that will be this big. But so far, this being a 3-stacked interchange is already doing the job of, not wasting so much space, because we have one underground interchange, and then we have a railroad junction in the middle, and on the top is another interchange for the elevated roads coming from the Wyrd Beltway. I will get back to this once we reach this area for future neighborhoods, but so far this is just a placeholder just so we can have the highway system working. I'll end it here, guys, with the inner city neighborhood. This is probably what many of you have been waiting for when it comes to futurism. But there's obviously a lot of work to be done, and I want to finish up the 3 neighborhoods of Zarya, Zvezda, and Unity first. I'm also going to say thank you for the support from my subscribers and my patrons on Patreon. After this video, I probably won't upload another video until maybe just before Christmas. As you know, these episodes are a lot of work, starting from an idea, then researching about various topics to support this idea, and then I go about writing a 10-page script, and finally do some experimentation in the game. It's a lot of information that I share in these videos, but I want to bring you an experience that goes beyond the typical city building genre, either an inspirational or educational experience. So now that it's nearing the end of the semester for me, time is getting pretty constrained, so I probably won't have enough time to do any massive work. I may be able to squeeze in one more video for this month, but I just don't know. So please follow me on my Twitter and Facebook for any updates. Even with all these exams, I may not be able to launch the game to play around and build, so in the meantime, I'm still going to be doing some research and script writing. Again, if you guys like my work, please like and subscribe, and if you like it even more, please support me on my Patreon. For now, I'll see you guys in the future, and happy holidays. It's just about that time of the year again. I had one subscriber say to me, "This is just a game, Yuttho." Well, allow me to suggest this perspective. As a child, I have always viewed the world of games and the internet as a shadow of our reality, simply an extension of our human condition. I want to use Aster-yee-ah as a tool to help my fans and myself to give hope and think of a brighter future, a time period that is tolerant and responsible. Amid the recent terror attacks in France, I had one subscriber say to me, "My country is under attack by terrorists right now." Why do I say this here? Because I hope one day, one hopeful day, we will stop this bullshit and learn to live together without war for such things which have no meaning when you see how bad the world can go with politics, religion, and money. I had to say this. Thanks for reading, and sorry if this is irrelevant. I was thinking about the world you created, Aster-yee-ah, and I want to know of this kind of world instead of a world with terrorism and innocent lives stolen. This is not irrelevant at all. In times like these, one of the things I've thought about was what Carl Sagan had said about this image. It underscores our responsibility to deal more kindly with one another, and to preserve and cherish the only home we've ever known, the pale blue dot.